Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. The first time I saw the gate, it looked like nothing. Just a rusted, crooked rectangle of steel bars half swallowed by sumac and young aspen, set into the hillside like somebody had tried to fence in the mountain itself. The county had slapped up a sun-bleached warning sign years ago. Danger, abandoned mine, and then forgotten it. Most people did what you're trained to do in the mountains. You notice the sign, you file it away, you keep moving. I didn't. Not because I was brave, and not because I was curious in a romantic way. I stopped because I'd spent the last 2 weeks sleeping in places that were never meant to be slept in, and unlocked a utility closet behind a closed gas station in Durango, the backseat of a Subaru with no keys in it, a crushed culvert under U.S. Highway 550, where the wind sounded like a freight train all night, and my body had finally started to say the quiet parts out loud. You can't keep doing this. I was heading north out of Silverton, Colorado, along the old mining roads that lace the San Juan Mountains like scars. I stayed off the main highways as much as I could, not because I thought the roads were haunted or anything dramatic, but because the worst of the panic had pooled on pavement. When things broke, people did what they always do. They drove until they ran out of fuel, ran out of road, or ran out of luck. The highways turned into parking lots. The towns turned into waiting rooms where nobody knew what they were waiting for. The backcountry was different. The backcountry didn't care. The gate sat above a short, rocky spur road that ended in a collapsed berm of tailings. Gray rock fragments, broken timber, and old iron hardware lay scattered like the mountain had coughed up the bones of 100 years ago and left them in the sun. If you didn't know what you were looking at, you'd think it was just mining trash. If you did know, you recognized patterns. A cut slope, a man-made bench, the unnatural line where rock had been chipped back into something almost flat. A portal, an adit, a way in. I'd worked around mines before, but not the romantic, lantern-on-the-helmet kind. My job history was the modern sort. Survey work for a civil outfit, slope stability assessments around old workings, and a couple of short contracts with a contractor who did remediation, closing dangerous openings, installing bat gates, making sure tourists didn't fall into a vertical shaft and turn into a headline. I knew enough to respect a mine, and enough to know that respect doesn't mean never go in. It means go in like it wants you dead, because it does. I stood there for a full minute listening. No engines, no shouting, no distant sirens, just wind in the trees and a faint trickle of water somewhere upslope. Then, this was the part that made me take a step closer, there was a cold breath coming from behind the gate. Even in July, the air that rolls out of a mine is a different temperature. A steady exhale from underground. Cool, damp, consistent. Consistent is everything when the world stops being consistent. I didn't have a plan. I had a pack, a battered hard hat I'd kept out of habit, 2 headlamps, a coil of bright survey ribbon, and a small crowbar that had become my favorite tool in the last month because it could open doors, lift boards, and convince people to back away without needing to do anything irreversible. I also had a compact handgun in a hip holster, plus a 12-gauge pump I'd scavenged from a ranch house where the owners were gone and the windows were smashed in from the inside. I'd never been a collector. I didn't even own a gun before everything fell apart. But I'd learned fast that tools are just tools, and it's the world that decides what they're for. The gate wasn't locked anymore. Someone had tried to weld it shut years ago, but the welds had cracked and the hinge pins were eaten through with rust. I could have shoved it open with one hand, but I didn't. I pulled on leather gloves, wrapped my fingers around the bars, and moved it an inch at a time so the metal wouldn't shriek. Every sound travels weird in the mountains. A little squeal can carry. A slammed car door can bounce off a canyon wall and come back at you twice as loud. I'd learned to treat noise like smoke, small at first, then suddenly everywhere. When the gap was wide enough, I slipped through. The entrance area was exactly what I expected. A collapsed mess, not deep enough to be truly underground, but deep enough that daylight fell away quickly. Broken rock and rotted timbers lay in a pile just inside, like the mine had tried to seal itself. Whoever had worked this place had stopped doing maintenance a long time ago, and the mountain had taken the opportunity to reclaim the opening. I stood in the mouth of it and did the first rule of underground work. Check the air. You can't see bad air. You can't always smell it either. Some gases give you warning. Hydrogen sulfide has that rotten egg smell. Methane can carry a faint sweet odor sometimes, but carbon monoxide is invisible and polite. It doesn't announce itself. It just replaces your ability to think and then replaces you. I didn't have a proper multi-gas meter. I wasn't a company truck with a safety budget anymore. What I had was a cheap disposable carbon monoxide detector I'd grabbed from a hardware aisle weeks ago, plus a little butane lighter and the willingness to be cautious to the point of looking ridiculous. I set the carbon monoxide detector down on a rock and waited 30 seconds. The little screen stayed calm. Then I flicked the lighter and watched the flame. It held steady. It didn't gutter or pull sideways like it would if oxygen was low or airflow was doing something strange. Not a guarantee, just a hint. I went in. The rubble wasn't a single pile. It was layers, slabs of shattered rock that had slid and wedged, timber pieces that had snapped at within and settled, and finer material that had sifted down between everything like gray sand. I took my time, testing each step with the crowbar, listening for hollow sounds. The mine had that particular smell. Wet stone, old wood, and mineral tang, like pennies and dust. The tunnel behind the collapse opened into a short chamber. The wall on my left had been cut back and squared off, and the floor dipped slightly like it had been graded to guide water toward a drain. That was when I saw it. The elevator chamber. Most people hear mine elevator and picture a big open shaft with a cage dropping straight down. This wasn't that. This was the machinery space. The room carved out beside a vertical shaft where the hoist system used to sit. The shaft itself was off to the right, partially fenced with remnants of steel frame and a collapsed wooden collar. The hoist drum was long gone, probably salvaged as scrap decades ago, but the chamber remained. A carved pocket of space big enough to stand in, sheltered from weather, hidden from casual view, and, this was the important part, separated from the main drift by a bend and a choke point. Defensible. My heart did that stupid, hopeful thing it hadn't done in a while. I walked the space slowly, headlamps sweeping over rock walls scored by drill marks. The ceiling was low enough that a tall man would have to duck. The corners were rough. The floor was uneven but mostly dry. On one wall, someone had once mounted electrical conduit. The brackets were still there, but the wire was gone. A narrow niche had been cut into the rock, maybe to hold tools or lanterns. It was small. It was ugly. It was perfect. I backed out to the entrance and sat on a rock, breathing hard like I'd run a mile. Not because I was tired, but because my brain had started sprinting. If I could clear the rubble at the portal enough to make a discreet entrance, if I could shore up the weak spots with something better than rotten timber, if I could set up a living space in the hoist room, if I could do it without turning the mine into a trap, I looked down at my hands. They were already scraped. My knuckles were swollen in a way they hadn't been a month ago. I'd been doing everything myself. Carrying, lifting, prying, dragging. Like a one-person moving crew for a life that kept collapsing and needing to be rebuilt. I told myself I'd scout it first. Just scout, no commitment. But I was lying. By the time the sun dipped behind the ridge, I'd already made 2 trips back to my pack and started stacking rocks in a way that meant I'd decided. I didn't speak the decision out loud. You don't need words for everything. Sometimes your body makes the call and your mind catches up. The next morning, I started work. Clearing rubble is not heroic. It's slow, boring, and painful in the most repetitive way. You pick up a rock, you move it, you pick up another. You get dust in your eyes and grit in your teeth. You scrape your forearms on sharp edges. You bang your shins. You sweat in cold air and then chill when you stop. The first thing I did was create a hidden approach. If someone walked along that hillside, I didn't want them to see a clear trail leading to a mine opening, like a neon sign. I used a small folding shovel to break up the faint footpath and scattered loose rock and branches over it. Where my boots had crushed plants, I shoved duff back into place. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than nothing. In the mountains, better than nothing. Keeps you alive. Inside, I cleared just enough of the portal collapse to make a tight entrance for one person at a time. Not a wide open hole, not an invitation. A squeeze that forced you to slow down, to commit, to leave your shoulders exposed for a moment. If something ever came in fast, I wanted it to have to funnel through a choke point where I could control what happened. Then, I worked on supports. Old mines were timbered in ways that make modern safety folks cringe. Stacks of logs called cribs, sets of vertical posts and horizontal caps, and sometimes nothing at all if the rock was competent. This place had a mix. Some old square-set timbering and one short drift, most of it rotted to the color of coffee grounds, and then bare rock in the hoist chamber. I wasn't going to pretend I could restore a mine properly. That takes crews and equipment and engineering. But I could reduce obvious risks. A couple miles down the valley, there was a collapsed mine dump with timbers that were less rotten because they'd been buried under tailings and stayed relatively dry. I spent a full day dragging out beams. Some were heavy enough that I had to rig a simple pulley system. A climbing pulley, a length of static rope, and a crude anchor wrapped around a boulder. It was not pretty, but it let me move pieces that otherwise would have pinned me to the ground. Back in the chamber, I used the beams to create a reinforced entry frame at the choke point. 2 vertical supports wedged tight, with a horizontal beam across the top, all locked with steel brackets scavenged from a barn and driven in with a hammer I'd found in a roadside toolbox. I wasn't trying to hold up the mountain. I was trying to hold up that specific slice of broken rock that looked eager to fall. For the ceiling, where there was a crack that worried me, I drilled shallow holes with a cordless hammer drill I'd pulled from an abandoned work truck. The batteries were down to 2 working ones, so I treated each use like currency. In the holes, I set rebar lengths as crude rock pins, epoxy set using construction adhesive that was never meant for this job. Then I wedged a beam under that line, not touching the crack directly, but giving the rock a second way to distribute load. It wouldn't pass an inspection. It might pass a winter. Once I trusted the structure enough to sleep there without imagining the ceiling dropping in my dreams, I started building the shelter. The hoist room had the best feature you can have in an emergency. It forced organization. You don't get to sprawl, you don't get to pile things in the corner and deal with it later. In a tight space, later becomes never, and never turns into you can't reach your water when you need it. I carved out zones like I was laying out a job site. The driest corner became food storage. I laid down a layer of old rubber conveyor belt I'd found rolled in the back of a shed near Animas Forks. On top of that, I set milk crates and 2x4s so the food wasn't sitting directly on stone. Canned goods went in neat rows, labels out. Dry goods, rice, beans, pasta, went into sealed plastic buckets with screw-top lids. If you've never stored food in the mountains, here's the lesson. Mice can get into everything you don't protect, and they will. They don't need an apocalypse. They just need an opening the width of a pencil. The opposite wall became water. I didn't have the luxury of a well. What I had was a seep line and a seasonal trickle that ran down the tunnel floor during the warm part of the day. I captured it with a shallow trench lined in plastic sheeting and guided it into a sediment bucket. From there, it went through a gravity filter. 2 stacked containers, one filled with layered cloth, sand, and activated carbon from aquarium supplies, the second as the collection bin. After that, I treated it with household bleach measured carefully in drops, and then I boiled it when I could spare the fuel. I also hauled in water. Every time I went into Silverton's edges, I brought back jugs. The town had gone quiet in that eerie way that's worse than loud panic. Doors open, vehicles abandoned, a few stray dogs wandering like they were waiting for owners who weren't coming back. There was a public works building with a locked spigot. It took me 10 minutes with a wrench to figure out the valve arrangement and get it to cough out a thin stream. I filled every container I had and carried them uphill in 2 trips, shoulders burning. Tools lived near the exit. Crowbar, hatchet, folding saw, pry bars, a small sledge, a coil of rope, duct tape, zip ties, spare headlamp batteries. If something went wrong, I didn't want to climb over sleeping gear to get to the one thing that could fix the problem. My sleeping space went against the back wall, away from the shaft. The vertical opening still bothered me, even half collapsed. Shafts can carry cold air, strange drafts, and sometimes smells you don't want. I built a simple platform from pallets and plywood. Foam mat on top. Sleeping bag rated for cold, a wool blanket over that. If you've never slept underground, it's quieter than you expect. No wind, no insects, no distant traffic. Just your own breathing and the occasional drip of water that sounds like a clock. The last piece was the part that turned it from camping into shelter. Ventilation. People think underground means sealed. Sealed is how you die. You need air exchange. You need to know where your air is coming from and where your smoke will go if you ever have to cook or heat. I spent 3 days mapping airflow. Not with fancy gear, with ribbons. I tied strips of survey ribbon at different points in the drift and watched how they moved at different times of day. Mountains breathe. Temperature gradients shift. Pressure changes. Sometimes the mine would inhale in the morning, pulling air in from the portal and pushing it down towards deeper workings. Sometimes it would exhale in the afternoon, pushing cool air out like a sigh. I wanted my living chamber on a section that didn't trap stale air. Eventually, I found the pattern. There was a secondary connection somewhere deeper, a raise or a vent shaft that reached higher elevation. That meant the mine had a natural chimney effect. Good for fresh air. Bad if anything dangerous ever got in and followed the same path. To control it, I built a door, not a fancy one. A framed plywood slab reinforced with angle iron, hung on heavy hinges. It sat at the choke point between the main drift and the hoist chamber. I sealed the edges with strips of rubber and foam so I could reduce drafts when I needed. I cut a small vent window into it and covered it with metal mesh. That vent could be opened or closed with a sliding panel. If I had to, I could sit behind that door and listen. And listening mattered more than I wanted to admit, because the mine maze was both a shield and a threat. The infected, people who moved wrong, people who didn't respond to voices, people who kept coming even when you did everything you could to signal, "Stay away," rarely came into the mine. Darkness seemed to confuse them, or maybe the cold air and lack of obvious sound made it less interesting. I'd watched a handful from a ridgeline one evening down near the river. They wandered in clusters like lost hikers, then drifted apart again. They weren't strategic, they weren't smart, but they weren't harmless either. They reacted to noise, to movement, to the sudden appearance of anything living. The mine kept me away from them, but the mine had its own dangers. Old workings collapse, timbers rot, water undermines supports, rock shifts with freeze-thaw cycles, and animals, bears, mountain lions, raccoons, don't read warning signs. They go where they smell food, and underground food smells like a promise. So I treated exploration like a job. Short sections, marked routes. A strict rule, never go beyond the last known safe point without leaving a clear return path. I used chalk and arrows on the wall, and I numbered intersections like I was building a map for somebody else. At each turn I put a small reflective tack low on the wall. In headlamp light, it glowed like a star. I also built what I called my wind chimes, but they weren't decorative. They were early warning. I cut thin strips of copper pipe and aluminum conduit into lengths and hung them on wire at the key points in the drift. Not right at the portal. Wind could make those ring constantly, but deeper, where air movement should be minimal. If airflow changed suddenly, those bits of metal would clink and tap in a way that was impossible to ignore in the stillness. Airflow changes underground can mean a collapse opened a new path, or it can mean something moved. The first week in the shelter, I slept better than I had in a month. I cooked simple meals on a small camping stove just inside the door to the hoist chamber with the vent open, letting fumes drift out into the drift and away. I organized gear. I cleaned myself with damp wipes and cold water in a way that felt almost civilized. I even shaved, not because it mattered, but because it reminded me I was still a person and not just a creature that hid. Then, on day 9, the mine reminded me it didn't care about my comfort. I was half asleep when I heard it. A faint metallic clatter, like someone tapping a spoon against a mug. My eyes snapped open. In the darkness, underground, sound doesn't have distance the way it does outside. It's either there or everywhere. I lay still, breathing shallow, listening for the rhythm. The clatter happened again, 3 quick taps, and then a long silence. That was one of the pipe fragment chimes. I slid out of the sleeping bag and moved without turning on my headlamp. I'd learned to do everything by feel. Boots placed exactly where they lived, holster checked, shotgun leaned against the wall with the muzzle angled safely. I clicked my headlamp on at its lowest setting and aimed it at the floor. The shelter door was closed. The vent panel was half open, as I'd left it to keep air moving while I slept. No smell of smoke, no smell of anything strange. I put my ear near the door. At first, nothing. Then, so faint I almost thought it was imagination. Voices. Not close, not right outside the door, but deeper. Echoing down the drift like the mine had turned into a giant concrete hallway and someone had forgotten the sound carried. My heart did something ugly. I didn't want people here. I wanted people alive, somewhere else. I wanted the world to have pockets of normal. But I did not want strangers finding my hole in the mountain, because strangers meant questions, and questions meant choices, and choices meant risk. The voices came again, clearer this time. "I'm telling you, there was a gate. Keep it down. Can you see anything?" Then a scraping sound, like rock sliding under a boot. My hands went cold, even though the air was already cold. I slid the vent panel wider, just enough to see the drift beyond without exposing my face. The tunnel outside was a dark ribbon, headlamp light bouncing off wet stone. Farther down, maybe 60 feet away, 2 white beams bobbed, moving carefully. Headlamps. People. I backed away and thought fast, the way you do when you know you have about 3 seconds before the situation becomes whatever it becomes. Option 1. Stay silent. Let them pass. Hope they didn't notice the reinforced choke point and the freshly placed supports. Hope they didn't smell food. Hope they didn't keep exploring. Option 2. Announce myself. Control the conversation. Risk them panicking, shouting, or trying to force their way in. Option 3. Leave. Slip out through the portal and disappear into the woods, sacrificing the shelter to protect myself. Option 4. Do something worse, something final, something I didn't even let myself name. I didn't want option 4. I hadn't become that person. Not yet. And I kept telling myself, not yet, as if it was a promise that would always hold. The voices drifted closer. I heard a woman this time, strained. My ankles not going to do another mile. A man answered low. We just need a place to sit for a minute, then we keep moving. A third voice, young, maybe late teens. I don't like this. I don't like this at all. They were scared. Scared, people make noise. Scared people make mistakes. And scared people, if they'd been chased, could be leading something. I made my decision without liking it. I stepped to the door, put my mouth close to the crack, and spoke in a calm, controlled voice that didn't carry farther than necessary. Stop where you are. The beams froze instantly, then swung toward the door. Who's there? The man called. Don't come closer, I said. I'm not looking for trouble, but this is my shelter. There was a long pause. Then the woman said, We're not trying to steal anything. We didn't even know someone was in here. You know now, I said. Back up 10 steps and stay there. They shuffled, boots scraped, rock clicked. Are you alone? The young one asked. Yes, I lied, because I'm alone is always safer than I might have people. People make you a target. A lone survivor makes you a question mark. The man swallowed audibly. We just need a place to rest. She's hurt. We'll leave after, I swear. I closed my eyes for half a second, fighting the instinct to shut the door and pretend I hadn't heard them. The mine had already proven sound carried. If I left them out there, they'd keep exploring. They'd find my entrance. If they got desperate, they'd pry at things. If they got angry, they'd do worse. If they were decent people, I could help them and maybe gain allies. If they weren't, I could be handing my life to strangers. The hard part about surviving isn't doing what's right. It's deciding what right is when every option has teeth. Tell me your names, I said. The man answered first. I'm Nolan Vance. The woman's voice came next, tight like she was biting pain back. Marissa Shue. The young one hesitated. Tyler. Where are you coming from? I asked. Nolan took a breath. We came from Farmington, New Mexico. We were trying to get to, somewhere quieter. We heard the mountain towns were empty. They're not empty, I said. Clearly, Nolan said, and I heard a tired attempt at humor in it. What happened to her ankle? I asked. Marissa answered this time. I stepped wrong on the scree. It rolled. I heard a pop. I can walk, but it's not great. I thought of the ridgelines outside, the loose talus, the way one bad step can ruin you even without the world ending. Any of you bitten? I asked, and I hated that I had to ask it. There was immediate indignation. Nolan snapped, No. Ty added, No, we would have said, I believed them. Maybe because I needed to. Okay, I said. Here's how this works. One at a time. Nolan, you come forward first, hands visible, headlamp pointed down. Stop at the beams. Do not touch the supports. Nolan's light bobbed. Okay, I'm coming. He walked slowly, boots scraping. I watched through the vent slit as he came into view. Mid-30s, lean, dust on his clothes, backpack straps cutting into his shoulders. He looked like someone who'd been walking for weeks. His hands were open, palms visible. He stopped at the choke point beams. I'm here, he said. Turn around, I said. What? Turn around slowly. There was a pause, then Nolan turned, showing me his back and pack. No weapons visible, though that didn't mean none. Most people were armed now. It was the new normal. Lift your shirt, I said. He did, awkwardly, exposing his waistband. No obvious bite marks, no fresh tears in fabric. That didn't prove much, but it was something. Okay, I said. Stay there. Marissa next. Same rules. Marissa's light moved, slower. When she came into view, she was favoring her left foot. She was in her late 20s maybe, hair pulled back, face pale with effort. When she reached the beams, she leaned a hand against the rock wall without meaning to, and I tensed, but she didn't touch the supports. I'm not going to fight you, she said, breathless. I just need to sit. Ty, I said. The young one came last, a skinny kid with a too big pack and the tense posture of someone trying not to show fear. He had the quick, scanning eyes of a teenager who'd learned the world could bite him when adults weren't paying attention. When they were all there, lined up like that in the drift, I opened the door. Not all the way, just enough to step into the tunnel with my shotgun angled down but ready. The mine air wrapped around me like cold cloth. Nolan's eyes widened slightly when he saw the shelter entrance behind me. You built this. I improved it, I said. Listen carefully. You can rest for 10 minutes. You don't come inside yet. I need to be sure you didn't lead anything in here. Ty swallowed. Lead what? I didn't answer. I didn't have to. Marissa sank to the ground with a small hiss and immediately started rubbing her ankle. Nolan looked at her, guilt flickering. We shouldn't have come in here. You came because you needed to, I said. I get it. Now be quiet. We listened. At first, nothing. Just the drip-drip far down the drift like water marking time. Then, faintly, the mine carried another sound. A soft, sliding scrape from deeper in the tunnel. Ty's head snapped toward it. Did you hear that? Nolan stiffened. Yeah. Marissa went still, hand frozen on her ankle. I raised a hand, palm out, and all of them shut up instantly. The scrape happened again, closer. Not footsteps exactly, something dragging. My mind flashed through options. A raccoon, a porcupine, a bear, a lost dog, a person crawling, or one of the infected moving badly, drawn by the earlier voices. I backed toward my door and whispered, "Lights off." Nolan hesitated, then clicked his headlamp off. The tunnel went darker instantly. Marissa and Ty followed. The only light left was the thin spill from my door crack behind me. In that dimness, you could hear everything. The scrape came closer, then a low thump like something bumping a wall, then another. Marissa's breathing turned quick and shallow. I didn't want them in the chamber if this turned into a problem, but I also didn't want to leave them out here as bait in my own tunnel. I made another choice. Inside, I hissed. Fast, quiet. Nolan helped Marissa up. Ty grabbed her pack. They moved like people who didn't want to learn what the scrape belonged to. I pulled them through the door one by one and slammed it shut, sliding the panel closed and locking it with a metal bar. The sound was loud in the stillness, but it was done. We stood inside the hoist chamber, shoulder to shoulder, lights off except for my headlamp at its lowest setting pointed at the floor. The air felt suddenly tighter with 3 extra bodies. Marisa leaned against the wall, eyes wide. "What is that?" "Could be an animal," I said, keeping my voice even. "Could be something else. Nobody makes noise, nobody runs. If you run, you trip. If you trip, you make more noise." Ty whispered, "If it's one of them, can it even see us?" "They don't need to see," I said. "They react to sound and movement, sometimes smell." Nolan's jaw clenched. "We didn't mean—" "I know," I said. "Just listen." We waited. The scrape moved past the choke point outside the door. We could hear it, muffled through the plywood and rubber seals. It paused, as if it had sensed the change in airflow. Then there was a series of quick taps. One of the pipe fragment chimes. Nolan's eyes flicked toward me. Even in low light, I could see the question. "Yes," I thought. "That's what woke me. That's what told me somebody was in my mine." Outside, something made a wet snuffling sound. Not dramatic, not a roar, just the mundane sound of a creature investigating. Then a low, drawn-out moan, like a person trying to speak through exhaustion. Marissa's hand flew to her mouth. Ty's eyes shone with panic. Nolan's shoulders tensed, like he wanted to step forward and do something. I put a finger to my lips. The sound drifted away slowly, scraping, receding down the drift. After a minute, it was gone, swallowed by the mind's natural quiet. Only then did I breathe out. Nolan's voice was barely a whisper. "That wasn't an animal." "No," I said, "it wasn't." Marissa swallowed. "How did it get in?" "The mind connects," I said. "Old workings, raises, vents. It doesn't have to come through the main entrance. It can wander in from somewhere else and end up here by accident." Ty looked around, the beam of his headlamp flicking on briefly before he remembered and shut it off again. "And you live here?" "I sleep here," I said. "Living is a bigger claim." There was a pause where none of us knew what to say, because the obvious question hung in the air. What now? Nolan was the first to find his voice. "We're sorry for bringing that near you." "You didn't bring it," I said. "You brought noise, the mind brought the rest." Marissa shifted carefully, wincing. "If we leave, it might still be out there." "If you leave right now, yes," I said. Ty's voice cracked slightly. "So, we just stay?" I looked at the door I'd built, the supports I'd dragged, the water barrels lined against one wall, the food crates stacked neatly. I looked at the space I'd turned into a private island in the dark. 3 strangers had just stepped onto it. This was the moment the shelter stopped being only mine. And I hated how much I needed to think about what that meant. "I'll give you a deal," I said finally. "You rest. I'll check the drift in a bit, make sure it's clear. If it's clear, you leave before daylight. If it's not, you stay until it is." Nolan nodded quickly. "We'll do whatever you say." "That's not what I want," I said. "What I want is for you to understand that underground rules are different. If someone panics down here, everyone pays." Marissa's eyes held mine. She wasn't pleading. She wasn't bargaining. She was measuring. "I'm a nurse," she said quietly. That surprised me. "A nurse?" "Emergency department," she said. "Albuquerque, before." Nolan added I was maintenance at a municipal water plant. Ty hesitated, then said, "I was just school." I felt something twist in my chest. Not pity exactly, recognition. The world had thrown strangers together and stamped team on their foreheads whether they liked it or not. A nurse, a water plant, maintenance guy, a teenager. And me, a survey and stability contractor who'd learned how to make a mine into a hiding place. This was either the start of something that saved us, or the start of something that ruined me. Okay, I said. First thing, light discipline. Only one light at a time, pointed down, lowest setting. Second thing, nobody goes past that door without me. Third thing, we keep voices low and we don't say anything we don't need to say. Ty frowned. Like what? Like where this is, I said. Like what supplies I have. Like anything that would make someone outside want to find us. Nolan nodded again, slower this time. Understood. Marisa shifted and tried to sit more comfortably, but her ankle made her hiss again. I watched the way she held it, the way she guarded it, not dramatic, but real pain. Let me see, I said. She blinked. What? I've got a wrap, I said. And a splint material. You said you heard a pop. If it's a bad sprain, wrapping helps. If it's broken, we need to immobilize it. Nolan looked relieved. You have medical stuff? Enough, I said. I knelt and pulled a small first aid kit from a bin near my sleeping platform. It wasn't fancy. Bandages, antiseptic wipes, gauze, tape, elastic wrap, a few blister pads, and pain relievers. I also had 2 SAM splints, thin, flexible metal and foam sheets that can be shaped into a brace. I'd grabbed them from a ski patrol cache early on, thinking they might be useful. They were. Marisa extended her ankle cautiously. It was swollen, not grotesquely, but enough to tell the story. I pressed gently along the outside, asked her to point her toes, asked where it hurt most. She answered through clenched teeth, but didn't flinch away from the exam, which told me she trusted process. Nurse, I said, nodding. Okay, you know what you're dealing with. Probably, she said. I can't keep walking on it like this. I'll wrap it, I said. As I worked, Nolan watched my hands. Ty watched the door. All of us listened for the scrape to return. It didn't. When the wrap was on and the splint was molded, Marisa tested her foot carefully. It was still painful, but it held. Better, she admitted. Good, I said. Now you sit, drink water, eat something small. Then we talk about what happens next. Ty's eyes widened. We're really staying until morning? That depends, I said. But you're not wandering my mind in the dark with an injured ankle and whatever that was out there. Nolan exhaled. Thank you. I didn't like gratitude. Gratitude made this feel like a decision with moral weight instead of a practical choice. I preferred practical. Practical keeps you alive. Still, I nodded once. Here's the thing, I said, keeping my voice low but steady. This mine isn't a bunker with a sealed door and a generator humming away. It's an old working. It can protect you, and it can also trap you. If we're going to do this, if we're going to share the space even for a night, you need to understand the rules of the mountain and the rules of underground. Nolan leaned forward. Tell us. I pointed to the water barrels. Water is life. We don't waste it. We don't contaminate it. Bathroom is a bucket system and it's away from the sleeping area. No exceptions. Marisa nodded, already understanding. I pointed to the food. Food is inventory. If you take something, you tell me. Not because I'm controlling, but because if I think we have 10 cans and we actually have 6, that's how people die later. Ty swallowed. Okay. I pointed to the vent panel and the little mesh-covered window. Airflow. You don't block vents. You don't light anything that smokes without asking. If you ever feel dizzy, nauseated, confused, that's not just fear. That can be bad air. You tell me immediately. Nolan's maintenance background showed in the way his eyes tracked the system. You've thought about this. I've been forced to, I said. Then I pointed toward the drift beyond the door. And the last rule: if you hear something out there, you don't go investigate because you want to be brave. You wait, you listen, you let the mind tell you what it's doing. Ty's voice was small. What if it comes in? It won't be easy, I said, tapping the door. And if it tries, we deal with it together. Marissa looked at me. How? I hesitated. Not because I didn't have an answer, but because the answer lived too close to words that platforms don't like and people don't like hearing. By stopping it, I said simply. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was agreement settling into place. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat with my back against the rock wall, shotgun across my lap, headlamp off, and listened to the mind breathe. Nolan dozed in short bursts, waking every time a drip sounded different. Ty stayed awake longer than he meant to, eyes wide in the dark, until exhaustion finally pulled him down. Marissa slept lightly, waking once to adjust her ankle, then slipping back into a shallow rest. I watched them in the dim spill of my lowest light and tried not to think about how quickly strangers become familiar when the world is dangerous. Sometime after midnight, one of the wind chimes tapped again. Not 3 quick hits like before, just a single light clink. I froze, every muscle tight. No scrape followed, no moan, nothing. Just the mine shifting, maybe. A change in airflow, a reminder that underground is never truly still. By morning, if you can call it morning when you can't see the sun, my sense of time came from my watch and my hunger. I ate a small packet of oatmeal made with cold treated water. It was gritty and bland, and it tasted like control. I stood at the shelter door and listened for a full minute before opening the vent panel. The drift beyond was dark and empty. No movement, no sound. I opened the door slowly, shotgun ready but not raised. Nolan stood behind me, hands empty, posture careful. He'd asked to come, not to take charge, but to be useful. I know mines, he'd said quietly. Not like you, but I know how to move carefully. Let me help. So I let him. We stepped out into the drift and moved toward the choke point. The air felt normal. The ribbons I'd tied earlier fluttered slightly, indicating the mine was exhaling. Good. At the first intersection, I stopped and shined my light low. There were marks in the fine dust on the floor, not clear footprints, more like dragged scuffs and smear where something had brushed the wall. Nolan swallowed. It came close. Yeah, I said. Is it still here? I don't know, I said. But we're going to find out without being stupid. We advanced another 20 feet. Then the mine answered the question for us. From deeper down the tunnel, we heard it again. That slow scrape, like a heavy boot dragging. Nolan's face went pale. I backed up slowly, motioning him with me. The scrape paused, then resumed, closer. Whatever it wasn't sprinting. It wasn't charging. It was just moving, pulled by habit or sound memory. But in a mine, slow is still dangerous, because slow means it can keep coming for a long time. We retreated to the door and slipped back into the hoist chamber, closing it behind us. Nolan exhaled hard. It's still in there. Somewhere, I said. Marissa sat up, alert instantly. Then we don't leave. Ty's eyes went wide. We're stuck? No, I said. We're waiting. And that's when I realized the decision wasn't just help strangers for a night. This was becoming something else, because once you share a hidden place with someone, you either turn them away and gamble that they won't talk, or you build something together and gamble that they won't break it from the inside. The mine had forced my hand with faint voices and a clatter in the dark. Now, I had to decide what kind of shelter this was going to be. A hideout for one, or a holdout for four. I looked at Nolan, at Marisa, at Ty, people who'd made it this far without falling apart. People who'd moved carefully in the drift. People who'd shut off their lights when told. People who'd listened. Outside the door, the scrape continued, patient as a metronome. Somewhere, deeper in the mine, rock shifted with a soft pop, the mountain adjusting itself like a sleeping animal. I kept my voice low. "Okay," I said. "New plan. We're going to make this place safer, and we're going to make it quieter. We're going to find out where that thing is coming from, and we're going to block the path without collapsing the mine on ourselves." Nolan stared at me. "How?" I turned toward my tool wall, already thinking in steps, already dividing work into tasks. "First," I said, "we map. Properly. Then we set barriers at the right spots, choke points, bends, places where the rock is stable. We use noise traps and airflow checks. We don't chase it, we manage it." Marisa's eyes narrowed, the nurse brain shifting into problem-solving mode. "And if it gets past..." "Then we have a last line," I said, tapping the door frame, "and we don't waste it." Ty swallowed. "So, we're staying." I didn't answer right away. I listened to the scrape. Then, I said the truth I hadn't meant to say out loud when I opened that gate. "For now," I told them, "yes, we're staying." And that was the moment the hidden shelter inside an old mining elevator chamber stopped being a place I found and became a place we were going to have to earn every day in the dark. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.